Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are thrilled that you're all here tonight for our sold-out screening and lecture for Rear Window. I know, lectures, screenings. It's amazing. Thank you for being here. My name is Teresa Scandifio. I'm the manager of adult learning here at TIFF Lightbox, and welcome to what I know is going to be a fabulous evening of Hitchcock and all things icy blonde. Before I introduce our illustrious guest speaker, I'd like to do some thank yous. So TIFF would like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, major sponsors RBC and BlackBerry, and our major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. So before I forget, please don't forget to turn off your mobile devices in consideration of our guest speaker tonight. I'm so excited whenever there's a sold-out lecture and screening. It's nerds unite. When our artistic director, Noah Cowan, mentioned that we would be hosting the Grace Kelly from Movie Star to Princess exhibition this fall, which is now open in our HSBC gallery on the main floor, and when our Cinematheque programmer, James Kwan, said that he'd be programming a film series to run alongside the exhibition, Icy Fire, the Hitchcock series, which runs now to December, mid-December, and then mid-December to the end of December, we have Grace on Screen, another fabulous film series. I knew who I wanted to ask to be the guest speaker for our Cinematheque lecture. Now, he's asked that I keep his introduction brief, so I'll just say that I'm thrilled that our very own cinephile and film scholar, TIFF's Director and CEO, Piers Handling, has agreed to give a lecture tonight on Hitchcock's Blonde. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Handling to the stage.
Boy, thank you so much for this warm welcome. This was so much fun to do, actually, the research for it. It's a huge, great, big, juicy topic. And I was telling Teresa I could probably do at least, I have material for about 3 lectures. But I'm going to keep it as short as I can. This is going to be, it's going to run about a half an hour, actually, with clips. And then we're going to show the film, and there'll be, I think, a Q&A afterwards. So Hitchcock clearly had a thing about blondes from the first moment he stepped behind the camera. And this fascination endured until his very last film, made 50 years later. If they were not natural blondes, he put them into wigs, as he did in his first film, The Pleasure Garden, with Virginia Valley, and with June Howard Tripp in The Lodger, 2 films both made in 1926. And 50 years later, he was up to his same old tricks, putting Karen Black into a blonde wig in Family Plot, made in 1975. And in the case of Anne Baxter, he had her dye her hair blonde for I Confess. Now, over the course of his remarkable 50-year career, Hitchcock worked very closely with a series of very famous and very blonde actresses. No need for them to dye their hair. Madeleine Carroll in The 39 Steps and The Secret Agent, Annie Andra in The Manxman and Blackmail, Joan Fontaine in Rebecca and Suspicion, Marlene Dietrich in Stage Fright, and of course Grace Kelly in Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief. Some include Ingrid Bergman amongst the Hitchcock blondes, although interestingly Hitchcock did not himself. I think she's more fair-haired than blonde in my opinion, but she starred in 3 of his films, Spellbound, Notorious, and Under Capricorn. And after Grace Kelly married and retired from the movies, he worked with a succession of actresses as his obsessions became increasingly fixated on the blonde. Doris Day in The Man Who Knew Too Much, Kim Novak in Vertigo, Eva Marie Saint in North by Northwest, Janet Leigh in Psycho, and of course Tippi Hedren in The Birds and Marnie. Now his blondes were of a distinct type, icy, regal, cool. But blondness carries many associations. For the Romans and Greeks, blondes were a sign of harlotry. The sensual and erotic Venus was more often than not painted as a blonde. Mary Magdalene, the original fallen woman, had 2 hair colors. She was painted often as a redhead, but also as a blonde by such famous painters as Titian, Tintoretto, and Fra Angelico. And then to muddy the waters, over the years the Virgin Mary acquired blondness, and Raphael, Botticelli, Fra Angelico, and Dürer all painted her in this manner. Now in fairy tales, the heroines are almost entirely blonde. The only exception is Snow White. And these fairy tale blondes would be associated with the positive values of purity, i.e. virginity, light, beauty, love, and often wealth. Moving along really quickly to the movies, in the early days of the cinema, we had the fair-haired Mary Pickford, Lillian Gish, and Janet Gaynor, who were the good girls, associated with wholesome qualities. It was the dark-haired brunettes who were the vamps and the bad girls, Louise Brooks and, of course, Theda Bara. Now, Jean Harlow and Mae West turned everything upside down. They were bad in a really big, big way. And of course, in the 50s, the blonde was Marilyn Monroe, the personification of overt, warm, lush sex appeal. Now, the Monroe-Harlow blonde was not to Hitchcock's taste at all. In a 1962 interview, he said, and I quote, "I prefer a woman who does not display all her sex at once. I like women who are also ladies, who hold enough of themselves in reserve to keep a man intrigued. On the screen, if an actress wants to convey a sexy quality, she ought to maintain a slightly mysterious air." In his famous interview with François Truffaut, he talked about these ideas further. Again, I quote, "Sex on the screen should be suspenseful. If it is too blatant or obvious, there's no suspense. You know why I favor sophisticated blondes in my films? We're after the drawing room type, the real ladies, who become whores once they are in the bedroom." But Hitchcock gave his blondes a tough time. In Blackmail, Annie Andra is sexually assaulted. In Dial M for Murder, Grace Kelly is brutally attacked by an assassin. In The 39 Steps, Madeleine Carroll is handcuffed against her will to the leading man for a large section of the film. Hitchcock sent Eva Marie Saint into danger in North by Northwest, killed Janet Leigh brutally in Psycho, forced Tippi Hedren to endure numerous bird attacks in The Birds, had Sean Connery rape Tippi Hedren in Marnie, and I could go on. Now, Molly Haskell was the first critic to take Hitchcock to task in her 1974 book, From Reverence to Rape. And I'm going to quote here, as this passage is so famous, and she starts out by drawing a comparison to a couple of Eric Romer's films. This is a direct quote. "Romer, in My Night at Maud's and Claire's Knee, draws a dialectic between the blonde and brunette using the same moral coordinates as Hitchcock. Blonde, conceited, aloof, brunette, warm, responsive, which are in turn a fascinating switch of the traditional signals. The sexual connotations of the old iconography remain, blonde virgin, brunette whore, but the values are reversed, so that it is the voluptuous brunette who is good and the icy blonde who is bad. For Hitchcock, the blonde is reprehensible not because of what she does, but because of what she withholds: love, sex, trust. She must be punished, her complacency shattered, and so he subjects his heroines to excruciating ordeals, long trips through terror in which they may be raped, violated by birds, killed. The plot itself becomes a mechanism for destroying their icy self-possession, their emotional detachment." Now, Laura Mulvey, in one of the most famous pieces of feminist film criticism, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, written a year after Haskell's book in 1975, examines how the unconscious of patriarchal society has structured film form. She singled out looking, scopophilia, as a source of pleasure. There is pleasure in using another person as an object of sexual stimulation through sight. This act of looking has been split between active male and passive female. And to quote her, "The determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female figure. Woman displayed as sexual object is the leitmotif of erotic spectacle. At the same time, the male figure cannot bear the burden of sexual objectification, so the male controls the film fantasy." For Mulvey, the female spectator, the females in the audience, as a result, have to have a masochistic relationship to this cinema. A little bit more about this later. Now, Hitchcock was one of the two filmmakers that Mulvey focused on in this article. The other was Joseph von Sternberg. And for those of you who know Rear Window already, the quotations above will certainly resonate. Now, I want to show you two clips to begin to open up the questions that both Haskell and Mulvey pose. The first clip is from To Catch a Thief, one of the 3 films he made with Grace Kelly. And the second clip is from The Birds, one of the 2 films he made with Tippi Hedren. Paula, if I could just have the clips, thank you. Now, clearly Haskell and Mulvey are not all wrong, but nor are they completely right on the evidence of these 2 clips. We have an image of Grace Kelly in complete control with Cary Grant as her passenger, and we have an image of Hedren not in any type of control at all. And I would argue that this dichotomy is basic to Hitchcock cinema. Other women critics, interestingly, women have contributed as much to the Hitchcock literature as men, began to probe deeper. In a highly perceptive study of this subject, Tanya Maletsky published a book in 1988 entitled The Women Who Knew Too Much, which sets out to add complexity and subtlety to this debate. She maintains that there is a space in some of Hitchcock's films for the limited expression of female desire, and that in the process, the films reveal some of the difficulties women face in the process of becoming socialized within the patriarchal system. She also took on Mulvey's statement that the female viewer was in a masochistic relationship to these films. For Medletsky, the female spectator is always caught up in a double desire, identifying at one and the same time not only with the passive female object, but with the active, usually male subject. Now to the Grace Kelly films, as I think that this critical debate sets the scene for some thoughts on Rear Window. Now, Hitchcock made 3 films with Kelly, Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief, and he was hoping to make a 4th with her. She was to play the lead in Marnie, but she had to actually back out of the project. In all of these 3 films, Kelly plays a Hitchcock blonde who has, in Donald Spotto's words, an apparently cool, chic sensuality. Her performances are remarkable for their quiet, cautious refinement and a warmth that forestalls remoteness. She projects a credible hybrid of elegance and sex. In a March 2010 lecture that Laura Mulvey, that name again, gave at the British Film Institute, she described the Hitchcock blonde as being cosmetic and artificial, denaturalized, highly stylized. She is all surface exterior and engages in a masquerade. Behind her facade is the hint of a secret. Vertigo, North by Northwest, The Birds and Marnie are all cited as examples. But Mulvey then goes on to add that the Grace Kelly blondes stand apart. They don't share this secret side. She stars in films without the duplicitous plot narrative. Now, this is very clear when one takes a close look at the films Hitchcock made with Kelly and underlines the difficulty of making broad generalizations about an artist like Hitchcock. Now, I don't have time to really analyze Dial M for Murder, where she is actually duplicitous, or To Catch a Thief, which is similar in effect to Rear Window. So I'll pass over these 2 films and move directly to Rear Window. Now, Rear Window is a film about a man who does not want to commit himself to marriage, and a woman who does, and this provides the underlying dynamic of the film. Jeff, Jimmy Stewart, is a photojournalist. In fact, his name is L.B. Jeffries, and his nickname is Jeff. Lisa, Grace Kelly, is his girlfriend, and she works in fashion. In fact, her name is Lisa Carol Fremont. And I only point this out because Hitchcock makes an issue of this in the film. Lisa introduces herself using all her names, a fully rounded character. She knows exactly who she is. There is ambiguity surrounding Jeff's name. We never find out what LB stands for. His naming is incomplete, enigmatic, like his character. Now, the film revolves around Jeff's feelings that a marriage with Lisa will not work out, while Lisa is convinced that it will. The film has 2 settings, Jeff's apartment and the New York courtyard outside his window. Jeff is immobile, in a wheelchair for almost the entire film. Lisa is mobile. She comes and visits, but she is absent for large parts of the film. The courtyard, an extraordinary set in its own right, houses numerous apartments, and as it's New York and a stifling hot summer, it's very easy to see what the neighbors are up to. Windows are open, lights are on, shades in most cases are up. If I could just have the next clip. Now, in effect, Jeff looks out at a number of screens, all of which are a reflection of the possibilities afforded him in a potential relationship or not with Lisa. We have 4 neighbors who are single, a middle-aged male musician with composer's block, Miss Torso, Miss Lonely Hearts, and the female sculptor. There are 3 married couples. One is childless, but they own a dog, possibly a surrogate for a child. There's a newly married couple who seem to engage in endless sex. They're behind the screen that's down at that particular point in the film. And then there's a 3rd married couple, the most important in the film, the Thorwalds. He is a costume jewelry salesman, and she is an invalid. Now, Jeff is bored, so to pass time, he gazes at the window and in effect becomes a voyeur. He has a camera with a telephoto lens, and he has binoculars, so he can probe further if he wishes. His housekeeper, Stella, calls him a peeping Tom, and in a revealing statement early on says that people should get out of their own house and look back in. And this is, in effect, what ultimately happens. Jeff is restless. He says to his editor on the phone that if he doesn't get back to work soon, he might do something drastic, like get married. He loves the rough and tumble of traveling the world to get his photos. Lisa, on the other hand, wants him to come home and trade his combat boots for a blue flannel suit. She wants to tame and domesticate him. But in Jeff's eyes, she is too perfect. She belongs to the rarefied atmosphere of Park Avenue. If only she was ordinary. I need a woman who will do anything, go anywhere. Now, the extraordinary shot that opens the film after the credit sequence, the wordless pan around Jeff's apartment, contains a telling moment. As the camera moves, we alight on a negative image of a woman, and the camera moves to pick out the positive image of that negative on the cover of a magazine. Immediately and very subtly, Hitchcock conveys the conflicted feelings Jeff has for women in these positive and negative images. Over the course of the film, Jeff looks out across the courtyard and observes the dramas of daily life. He is a detached observer. In Mulvey's phraseology, he stands in for the male spectator whose fantasy position the hero occupies. What Jeff eventually sees is what he thinks is a murder, or in fact, the aftermath of a murder. He thinks, based on the comings and goings and disappearances of Mrs. Thorwald, that Thorwald has murdered his wife. Now let's look closer at the Thorwalds. They were the last couple, for those of you who don't know the film, in the last clip. She was in bed. They are in fact a reverse image of Jess and Lisa. On one side of the courtyard we have Jeff and Lisa. He is an invalid, she is mobile, while over on the other side of the courtyard this situation is reversed. Thorwald is the active one, while Mrs. Thorwald is a bedridden invalid. If the characters who occupy the various apartments or screens in the courtyard are a potential expression of the way Jeff imagines or sees his future, the Thorwalds also fit into this schema. What in effect we are seeing ultimately is Jeff working through his feelings for Lisa, the fantasy of Jeff imagining the killing of Lisa, the Grace Kelly character. He plays this out in his head, unknowingly, subconsciously. This, of course, is complex, and Hitchcock explores the ramifications. At first, no one believes Jeff. Stella, his housekeeper, Lisa, the Grace Kelly character, and a detective friend, Doyle, all scoff at his suspicions. Jeff has not actually seen a murder take place. He's just assembling evidence by observing what is going on in the Thorwald apartment. Jeff ultimately deduces that Thorwald must have dismembered his wife. Hitchcock amusingly and tellingly highlights this idea in numerous ways through Jeff himself, the Jimmy Stewart character, and his attitude towards his neighbors. Jeff has nicknames for them, you just heard them. Miss Torso, Miss Lonely Hearts. And then there is the sculptress across the way, sculpting an abstract, headless torso. As Jeff becomes more obsessed with Thorwald, his relationship with Lisa changes in crucial ways. Can I have the next clip, please? So Grace Kelly turns from a sparring partner, trying to trap him into marriage, someone of whom he is suspicious, into a co-conspirator. And obviously this is a scene where they're sparring. And this fact that she turns into a co-conspirator is, I think, the key element in my mind of the film. We could just show the next clip, and this just shows you the difference between the tone between them at various parts of the film. So clearly we've moved from the two of them in a semi-hostile relationship to three of them, all complicit, all looking through the viewfinder, the slideshow. I'll show you just a very, very quick clip here. It's only about 20 seconds. Grace Kelly goes across and delivers a message. And this is the shot where she comes back. And just focus on the look in Jimmy Stewart's face, which is an extraordinary look again. Probably, a look of love, a look of complete awe and overwhelming admiration for what she's done. So this is about 20 seconds. So at this point, I would maintain that the female spectator in the audience finds herself identifying not with the male protagonist, the masochistic position described by Mulvey, but with the female character played by Grace Kelly. And I'll add that in this film, the male is inactive and the female active, breaking the active male, inactive female grid of typical Hollywood cinema. Now, Jeff finally must be allowed to live out his fantasy, the fantasy of killing Lisa. And the key scene here is when Jeff, Lisa, and Stella, now co-conspirators, talk about sending someone into Thorwald's apartment to find evidence. It is Lisa who impulsively takes up the challenge, as you heard, thereby completely committing herself to Jeff's desire to know what went on. And this is the climax of the film, for Jeff is forced to watch helplessly as Lisa projects herself literally into his subconscious imaginings as she enters Thorwald's apartment, enters this screen. Now, the wedding ring is a key element of this sequence. Male critics like Truffaut read this moment as having two meanings. Number one, Lisa has uncovered a key clue, and number two, by waving the wedding ring at Jeff, giving him a hint about their possible future, a possible marriage. Feminist critics have given it a third meaning, tying the wedding ring to Thorwald's brutal dismemberment of his wife, and thus an indication of what could possibly happen to women in marriage. Hey. Now, the result of Lisa entering Thorwald's apartment on her voyage of discovery is Thorwald, in effect Jeff's alter ego, coming across the courtyard and into Jeff's apartment, the final confrontation. And remember where we started with Stella, the quote from the housekeeper, the comment that people should get out of their house and look back in. Now, what Thorwald says as he confronts Jeff is highly revealing. What do you want from me? And who are you? Questions that Jeff has been struggling with through the entire film. Questions he might just as well be asking of Lisa. So Jeff grapples with his fears of commitment to Lisa and ends up in a situation that Hitchcock was to employ in numerous films, Saboteur, North by Northwest, and most famously in Vertigo. Hanging in space, his hero hanging in space, suspended over a void. The film does not exactly end that way, although this suspension above a void is perhaps what an audience takes away from Rear Window. The final shot is just as ambiguous as you will see, asking us, has anything been resolved between this couple, and what does their future hold in store? Now, I don't have time to fully examine the rich body of work that Hitchcock created, much of it centered around the blonde in the films he made after Kelly retired from the screen. Her retirement was a shock. He had found his perfect actress, and he foresaw making many more films with her. The post-Kelly blondes are very, very different. They are duplicitous, they are liars, sometimes disturbed, and they sexually confuse the men in the films. But at the core of these dark works, we see Hitchcock attempting to work out his deepest feelings and fears around the couple, and around the male obsession with the enigmatic blonde. The great film that foregrounds this idea is Vertigo. It is a direct commentary on a man falling in love with the perfect, ethereal, mysterious blonde, and then recreating her when she dies. It is a deeply complex and moving piece of work. North by Northwest, The Birds and Marnie continue this examination, each one a masterpiece, each one with a blonde at the center of the film, each one with a male protagonist in conflict with very dark forces. Now, Hitchcock's feelings for his blondes are not reducible to easy formulas, as I think I've tried to point out. They are a troubling mix of idealization and fantasy, mixed with warmth and affection, respect and awe, topped off with an element of sadism. Now, Grace Kelly brought out the warmth in Hitchcock. She only really suffers in Dial M for Murder. In Rear Window and To Catch a Thief, she plays women who are light, breezy, self-confident, and charming. Perhaps it is too easy to interpret the post-Kelly films as Hitchcock working out his feelings of anger and rejection at the fact that she had left him and the movies and gone off to become a princess. He had similar feelings, by the way, for Ingrid Bergman when she left him and Hollywood to go to Italy to make films with Rossellini. He clearly had conflicted feelings about blondes in his early career. But the mid-career films starring Joan Fontaine, Ingrid Bergman, and Grace Kelly are markedly different than the late masterpieces with Janet Leigh, Kim Novak, Tippi Hedren, and Eva Marie Saint. So enjoy the screening of Rear Window. I'll be back for a quick Q&A afterwards, and I hope this lecture has opened up some potential meanings for you when you watch the film. You're about to watch one of the great, great films of cinema. Thank you very much for being so attentive. I don't know if we want to field questions. Just watching it, a couple of questions for you guys. What do you make of the disembodied voice, the soprano singing scale? She's the only person, or it's the only disembodied voice. You actually never see that person in the film. That's one question I'd have of you. I haven't actually worked that part of the film out at all, and I'm not really sure I've read any critical analysis of that. There's another, I mean, I've watched this film so many times. There's another part of it. The one moment when he actually breaks the way he shoots the film, because he shoots it so carefully from Jimmy Stewart's point of view, looking across the courtyard. But there's a break in the film where he actually doesn't do that anymore. And it's the death of the dog. where you actually see the cutting of the film is completely different. He's actually in the courtyard. And people are shown in close-up in a very... The death of the dog this time really struck me, perhaps more than any other time. There's a kind of a reality in that moment. It's a shocking moment, actually. You never see the death of Mrs. Thorwald, of course, but you see the death of the dog, and somehow, the effect that I take away is that death is the emotion of the film. I mean, he's given us, the audience, a sense of the death of Mrs. Thorwald to the death of that dog, and it's really interesting the way he changes the cutting and shooting angles at that particular point in the film. But enough for me, and I hope I didn't spoil the film with the setup. Yeah. Go ahead. I think there's a microphone here too, so I don't have to repeat the questions.
Just a question to the group. Did anybody see any similarity between Jimmy's performance when Grace Kelly was being accosted as to the moment in It's a Wonderful Life when he's having that terrible realization in Marino's that his life has gone in a terrible, terrible direction? The mannerisms seemed almost identical to me, and I just wonder if anybody else had sort of noticed that.
Anybody? No, it's a very astute observation. Anybody else? What do you... Yeah, sorry.
Actually, I think we all got that kind of moment in the film that we've noticed. I mean, most people have seen it already, and it was very interesting, actually, your introduction, because it set us to do a Jimmy Stewart, and we were watching the movie carefully to pick up on things, and I'm sure we've all of us found something new in it. And thank you for your introduction and comments. Very valuable.
Thank you. There's things I didn't touch on in the film, which I think you guys picked up very, very early on. There's some characters that he doesn't actually focus on. The two girls who go up and clearly take their clothes off, and then the helicopter comes down. So the voyeurism is sort of, as a comic touch, is actually set up right from the very, very beginning. So it's not just Jimmy Stewart who's a voyeur. I mean, Stella walks in and says, we've all become voyeurs, and clearly voyeurism is around that society. It's not just this one individual particular character. And of course, I love the fact that they all ultimately, all three of them, Grace Kelly, the Stella character, and of course Jimmy Stewart, all turn into voyeurs eventually. I love the look back to when sorry, somebody else got a question?
There are a couple questions in the back.
I just wanted sort of your response to something. One of my favorite lines in this film happens at the beginning, where one of the characters says that we're turning into a nation of peeping Toms. And I wonder if you could, I'd love to hear your response to this wave of reality television that seems to be so popular now, that we love looking into other people's alleged lives or inside their homes and all the peculiar little things that they do. And also the fact that through the internet, all this, we sort of contact people through little screens rather than talking to them.
Yeah, completely. And of course, culture nowadays is so celebrity-oriented. You just think of our own film festival. What people concentrate on, of course, is the celebrities as opposed to the actual content. So no, unquestionably, we've turned into a society of lookers, a society where you don't go deep beyond the surface. You're basically, just peeping in, kind of observing people's lives. So I don't watch a lot of reality television. I obviously see a little bit of it, but I'm by no manner of means an expert. Interestingly enough, Grace Kelly herself, one of the reasons she really left Hollywood was because that was a part of it she herself did not really respond to. She was a star who didn't really like the star system, didn't really like people prying into her own personal life, didn't like that aspect of it at all, didn't want her own personal life to be part of the gossip mill, the rumor mill. I mean, she had a very short career. It was only about 6 years, and she had a very strange relationship with Hollywood. She was a very independent woman. She kind of fought the studio. She'd been, in those days, stars were signed up for 7-year contracts. and she was put in films by MGM that she didn't want to, or was offered films she didn't want to be put into. So she was very independent that way, and I think she, wanted to remove herself a little bit from that stargazing, that notion of, your life just being completely exposed to everybody, and kind of, grist for the rumor mill. So she, in a way, kind of lived out her own movie.
I was wondering if there's anything in regards to Kelly and Stewart both messing up two of their lines.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Grace Kelly, she somewhere near the beginning, she messes up one of her lines.
Oh yeah, that's
and
nice.
And Stewart does the same thing later on. I watched the other movie yesterday, To Catch a Thief, and there was no mess up of the lines. So I was wondering if there's something about that.
I really like those hesitations. I haven't read. I mean, Donald Spoto has kind of covered and written so much about Hitchcock and Grace Kelly. I mean, he's the great biographer, I guess, of those two. And yeah, he didn't mention any of that. I mean, obviously, those are the moments that directors talk about where the accidents happen and make it, of course, feel much more real, much more as if it's not a perfectly groomed, perfectly scripted film. So I love those little hesitations, and you kind of see them every once in a while in the film.
There's a question right here.
What interests me most, really, is the fact that Jimmy Stewart is a cameraman, so that in a way he's been a peeping Tom all during his career. And when you see what happens to the camera in the film, as soon as he's able to get away from just looking and puts the camera down, things start to happen in a kind of community way. And then what he does at the very end, his weapon against Torvald is ultimately to flash light at him. And so that sense of using the camera to defeat someone like that, and also to use light. Hitchcock is the most moral of filmmakers.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's the way he actually connects that moment of the flash cubes with the way Lisa introduces herself at the beginning of the film too. When she turns on very specifically the three lights, and I counted the number of flash cube shots. There weren't three, there were four. But no, it's his defense mechanism, obviously. It's the way he can defend himself. And of course, it's not particularly effective in this case. In fact, it's not effective at all. It delays the inevitable. So he's a man. I mean, I think the Jimmy Stewart character is a man who's completely out of touch with his feelings and all kinds. I mean, that's kind of reinforced constantly through the film. I mean, there's that lovely line where when Stella's massaging him, she said, you've got a hormonal problem because you're watching Miss Torso across the way and your temperature hasn't gone up. So he's not really connected to who and what he is. She is completely. I think that was the point I was making in the lecture. She knows who she is, and he is on the run, actually. I mean, I think that's accentuated many times through the film. She says it to him. I think you get that sense of just the furtiveness, him glancing around, him not concentrating on her when she's there, when they're actually kissing. He is elsewhere all the time. And, of course, the film finally is about him coming back to try not to be elsewhere, to be somewhere. But it's such a deeply ambiguous ending to that film. I mean, you have Lisa now dressed in an outfit that's completely different from it. She's actually turned into, I guess, on the surface, the woman that Jeff really wants. She's in loafers and jeans and a very kind of relaxed costume. And she's picked up the book, about the Himalayas, which I can relate to. And then she, of course, puts it down and picks up the Harper's Bazaar. So the ending is completely enigmatic. And so, the questions I posed at the beginning of what's going to happen to this couple, one doesn't really know. You have to actually see, I think, the next Hitchcocks. So when you look at the work of a director, it's ultimately one film connected. And I think the great moving thing for me is to see the Hitchcock films, to actually see them in some kind of sequential order, and to see what followed after this, to see him wrestling with his demons. I mean, Vertigo is such an extraordinary piece of work. And I would even extend it through to The Birds and to Marnie, where he is, just re-seeing these films, it's such a struggle that the male character has with these women in his life, and what he's trying to do with them, and the phobias he's trying to work out. All these films are actually on as a part of the retrospective in the coming weeks. But he's obviously got a very difficult, tortured, I would say, relationship. I mean, he did in his personal life. He has said in his autobiography that he only had sex once in his life, and of course that produced a child. And he had a very strange relationship with his wife. He had amazing fantasies about most of his actresses, Grace Kelly included, and very disturbing fantasies about Tippi Hedren, which were noticed by many people when he was shooting the film. I mean, the sequence I showed you here of the birds attacking Tippi Hedren took them a week to shoot. He actually wasn't on the set when it was being shot. She was unaware that that's what was going to happen. She thought it would all be special effects. She had no idea there were going to be real birds. They actually tied real birds to her legs with fish wire, et cetera, et cetera. It was a sadomasochistic moment, and she almost broke down. But he had this incredible, I mean, he was in love with Tippi Hedren and tried to seduce her, et cetera, et cetera. And same with Grace Kelly. I mean, everybody knew that he had a big crush on Grace Kelly. And I think he was a very... well, I guess many artists are. They have these deep, dark undercurrents, and I think none more so than Hitchcock himself. And of course, you see them all being worked out in the films in all kinds of ways. Strange relationship with his mother, and of course, the mother figures in, I mean, Psycho. The mother figure in The Birds is quite something. And seeing that film constantly over and over again, it's really interesting. The role that she actually plays in The Birds. I think one of the most powerful roles actually in The Birds.
Oh, question about the story of the movie was that Thorwald does cover up some of his actions.
Sorry, who does? Thorwald.
Thorwald?
Yeah.
Thorwald does cover up some of his actions, but does he hire that lady dressed in black that walks out of the room with him?
I presume so. Yeah, I mean, in a funny way, Hitchcock's not really interested in the murder, is he? He's not really interested in that. He's much more interested in something else in the films. It's not the mechanics of the plot. I think he kind of pays cursory attention to that kind of stuff. He doesn't really want to tie up all of those loose ends. He's not interested. You know, he called it the MacGuffins in his movies. They're just an excuse for him to examine other things, and the other things are clearly the relationship between Lisa and Jeff in this case. And I think most particularly Jeff working out his phobias, and I would argue working them out through looking at all of these other images in front of him, which are potential, options for him, and in particular working it out through what Thorwald's done to his own wife, because I think he has that, he wants to get rid of Lisa. It's very clear at the beginning of the film. They're not suited to each other, etc. He wants to live his own life. He wants to, in a way, psychologically get rid of her. And so you live that out. I mean, you see it being lived out. So the mechanics of what happened, who that person was, but I assume you're absolutely right. I assume it was somebody that but there's no reason. That's just, you're surmising that. There's no evidence. We're just guessing. That character never appears before, never appears afterwards. She's just sort of like there. The question is, was Raymond Burr unknown in those days to take a part like that? And to be honest, I don't know. The film was made in 1954. So this was early in his career, but to be honest, I don't know. I mean, I'm so familiar with him, as we all are, I guess, from the TV series. Yes, no, this was before. I think you're absolutely right. I think the Perry Mason was all in the 60s. Yeah, but I'm not exactly sure when Perry Mason started. 57, there you go. So he was in Place in the Sun around the same time. Boy, you guys know a lot. As I knew you did, actually. You're so.
There's a TV special on, I think it's called What an Evening, with Mel Brooks, where he talks about going out for dinner with Hitchcock and the amount of food that he consumed. And then at the end of it, he said to the waiter, "Do it again." And so in any of his movies, does he do a food thing?
Well, of course, the Frenzy, the amazing. I don't know if you know Frenzy. There's this wonderful, the wife in Frenzy of the policeman, very proper. She's very upper class. She has decided that she's going to engage in some gourmet cooking. So she's got some French cookbooks, and she serves him. All he's interested in is basically ham and eggs and a kind of a fulsome, wholesome meal. And she's serving him these very effete French dishes, and there's hardly anything there. You know, there's little quail, and it's hard for him to cut them. So yeah, there's jokes throughout all of Hitchcock, but that's one of the films where I can remember a food sequence. There must be some food in To Catch a Thief, because it was shot in the south of France, but I can't specific. In Frenzy, he comes back to this as a recurring joke all the way through the film.
Over here? Yes, to pick up on this, I did a whole piece on this in university on Hitchcock and food, and it starts with Psycho. The decorations in the office in the motel, all the stuffed birds, and it follows through in every single film from then on. Hitchcock had birds or a chicken dinner.
Okay, we have a question here.
There you go.
This isn't a question, it's an observation.
Sure.
In his TV series, the ultimate murder weapon was a leg of lamb, which the murderer subsequently cooked and ate.
Again, I mean, the humor in the films, you know, you see it's constant throughout this entire film. I mean, the humor around dismemberment. I mean, right to the very, very last, almost the very last shot where Stella is talking about, you know, I can't remember the exact line. I don't want to see that part of it or something like that. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, he's got a great sense of humor, and he places it. And I think that humor is a relief, obviously, for us. You're watching something that's incredibly intense, and to have that tempered with humor throughout, I think, is the mark. Well, you just have to look at Shakespeare's plays and the way that Shakespeare modulates the plays from high drama to low comedy. Maybe just one more question, because this has been a long evening, so I'm sure you guys are tired. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And do you know anything about the transformation from that short story to the screenplay to the shooting of the film?
My scholarship has not gone that far, David, so I don't, to be honest. I haven't read the book. I remember reading a little bit, and I should have come better prepared just in terms of that question. I can't remember. Oh, sorry, you didn't hear it? It was based on it was a short story by Cornell Woolrich? Well, we saw the credits. I can't remember the name either. But so the question was, did he change the short story? Did he change the original material very much in the screenplay? And sorry, yeah, to be honest, David, I'd have to. I can email you with the answer to that. That would be an easy one to research, but I honestly don't know how much he changed. I mean, most filmmakers obviously change the source material. I don't know which characters he added and which characters he didn't add to this. I'm not actually a Hitchcock scholar, so it's funny. You know the Hitchcocks in a certain way, and the scholarship around Hitchcock is immense, actually. I mean, I went back and read. I was lucky enough when I went to university. The great Hitchcock scholar at the time, Robin Wood, was at Queen's, and Robin had just written his book on Hitchcock's films, which was published in the UK in about '64, and I went in the late '60s to university. So Robin was there, and this is where I got to see my first Hitchcocks. But the scholarship subsequent, I mean, I obviously did a lot of research for this, is quite incredible. I mean, it goes on and on. I would say, along with a few other directors, Godard, there's just endless amounts of writing, critical writing. I mean, entire readers, of conferences, et cetera, on Hitchcock. And I read a fair bit around Rear Window specifically, and then just got into some of the other stuff. And I'll continue to read actually, because I haven't kept up with it. I mean, there's so much. And there's a lot of books that I refer to or read, and I'd be happy to share that reading list with you. And Michael Walker's book, Hitchcock Motifs, is fantastic. The Tanya Modletsky that I referred to, The Women Who Knew Too Much, is really wonderful. Zizek has written a book which is kind of interesting too, although very, very theoretical. Susan Smith, BFI, published a book on Hitchcock, which I think is also very, very fine. And then Robin actually went back to his own work and wrote a book called Hitchcock Revisited, where he reprinted the original and then added an immense amount of material to it. And Robin is kind of the original. It's funny how many of the new scholars all go back to Robin and refer to him, although the scholarship has moved well beyond. into very serious Lacanian philosophy or Lacanian analysis, psychological analysis, Freudian analysis of all these films. I mean, they lend themselves to that. Some very deep, some kind of impenetrable, but the sources are really, really fascinating to read. So thank you for being such a great audience. And I really, it was fun to prepare this. So thank you.